Hello! Today's Rumble stage, day 4 is over. We lose one team and we qualify another. This is Vision Denial, Clearing Vision MSI 2022. I don't have another rhyme. I did not think this bit through. Anywho, hi. My name is Sam. For those who don't know, this is Vision Denial. On the road to MSI, watched every single playoff of all the competing regions, yes, including that one. And we do this Clearing Vision series where we cover the day-to-day of MSI so far as it goes through. And like mentioned in my poorly thought-out little intro bit, we have one qualified team for the knockout stage / semifinals, and one team we say goodbye to. If you're guessing who it is based off of the thumbnail, great. And if you're guessing who got eliminated based off of performance recently, you're probably right also. Them's the ropes on this situation. So instead of wasting any more time, let's take a look at the first game of the day. The first game of the day is the PCS's Paris Saint-Germain Talons versus the LSE's G2, seem to just be having a harder and harder time recently. And honestly, this is more like the PSG that we know and love on the regular split. Controlled laning, smart macros, excellent team fights, and with unified maximizing damage output. It just took nearly a month to come out. Where was this entire time? G2 had selected a draft that required heavy early game pressure to work, and the Talons never allowed them to get that chance. G2 still showed some excellent hallmarks based off of great vision, solid wave manipulation, and they never really allowed Talons to passively balloon the leads. On that specifically, the Talons still felt a little slow in terms of trying to increase the tempo of the pressure, and unable to manage to get any ballooning for their gold lead is not the greatest sign based off of this. But this is a lot more consistent in matching from what we get. And given how well they really read how G2 played, honestly, this is already excellent as the game comes through. Let's see if they can really pull this off against the Royals or Evil Geniuses that already have a game on them, because this is the right step for them to qualify to the next stage on a team that we had mostly just written off. Let's take a look really at the goal graph here. So, and you can tell already, right? Like, the early game itself, G2 and Talons have, like, lockstep to each other, but it's always slightly in the Talons' favor, who are controlling the tempo at any given point. And it's quite surprising because G2 never really allowing them to balloon the lead. It all comes to a head near the 10-minute mark, or the Dragon contest from G2 was maybe not the most advised out of everything. Now, granted, once the lead had been taken, Talons really aren't doing much to balloon the lead much further than it expected. But this is already a great step on a situation where usually G2 would just run away with it. And on that, really, is G2 doing okay? Are we going back to pre-playoff run G2, which is super inconsistent and really dependent if Caps is on the ball? I'm hoping not, because they had shown such an excellent tournament up until yesterday. I really hate to see that fall through. Let's take a look at the next game. We've got the LCK's T1 versus the LCS's Evil Geniuses, and continuing this trend of upsets in the day. And honestly, it's not to discredit how the Evil Geniuses won, but the way that T1 lost is largely a continuous repeated error throughout games in terms of over-prioritizing Baron plays. T1 have almost everything else down pat for how to win a game. Honestly, but as Baron plays go, their setups are super rushed. The team fighting is not respected from the opponents, and their turns are not properly applied. It's really disrespectful all around, and teams have punished it appropriately from it. And it's weird because they don't have this issue around Drakes, turrets, heralds. It's really just the Barons. And for any team, any of the teams in this Rumble stage, to get a situation like this, Evil Geniuses, the most efficient at utilizing a Baron, this is the perfect scenario, perfect storm for them. They use the Barons usually to balloon or overtake leads incredibly well, and T1 just decided, here, have 2 free wins on us. 2 easy Barons, just gifted. And now Evil Geniuses could have done very little with it. They really could have, and eventually just lost out to the Drake fights later on when T1 would have had a better advantage and a better appropriate setup. But no. They use the Baron to regain control of the map, apply pressure, and set up picks just to win the game on that advantage that they had brought up. The Geniuses should pick more comfort for this kind of style, but I don't think that they'll be given any kind of chances like this later whenever they have to face off against the Royals or G2 later down the line for their the other 2 big threes that they have to face off. But as it stands, let's take a look at the gold graph real quick. Because as it stands here, look at how the gold graph drops instantly from the 2 Barons. You can see it. And T1's still doing their T1 thing, slowly gain leads from this, but on the second Baron, it's way too late. There is straight up 8k gold from the second Baron that is gained right off the bat that Evil Geniuses properly utilize. I cannot state this enough. The other teams may be more consistent across the board in different stages of the game, but when it comes to utilizing Baron, Evil Geniuses is the most efficient at gaining the most from it. And if you give them the chance like this is all you're going to get. You're going to lose. You cannot discount them when it comes to these kinds of plays. Let's take a look at the next one. We've got the VCS's Saigon Buffaloes versus the LPL's Royal Never Give Up. And this is the game that both simultaneously qualified and eliminated a team. Or virtually speaking. Royals didn't quite qualify, but based off of the results here, this pretty much nailed it right in. They're like, we're pretty solid here. I don't know why I used that voice. Because it's a super unfortunate game for the Buffaloes to lose, and honestly to get eliminated from. The Buffaloes played this nearly flawlessly from start to finish, nearly, preventing any actual leads from the Royals to get, all the while holding the tempo of the game completely in their control. And when it mattered most, they get the Baron, climb to a 5k lead, and could have postured straight up for an end. But in the Buffalo style, they overcommit and do so a couple of times, getting regularly punished and allowing the Royals more time to set up and find proactive opportunities. And the Royals, for their part, were very stable. Better vision on the board, strong understanding of the win condition. It mostly came down to individual mistakes that the Buffaloes capitalized on. And all of a sudden, they had to play on the back foot the entire game. But their vision comes up huge from it. Knowing the stronger macro play, they find a huge area of the fog of war to pull in the Buffaloes for the pick in a final fight to end the game around the Elder Drake contest. There was honestly just one more game for them to secure a spot for the semifinals, but this is the nail in the coffin for me. Most of the other scenarios that exist, they're 90% of the way through, and the matchups they've had so far, they've only had one team beat them, and it's not likely to change anytime soon from this. Now, the Buffaloes, this game really showed their strengths and equal weaknesses from it. Let's see if they can pull up a little bit more of upsets. I would like them to be kingmakers for the remaining of their games, because this was really good from them. They almost had it. Almost had it. Let's take a look at the goal graph, really, just to show you how close they were at this. Do you see that hill right there? Because the Royals clearly had a lead for just a brief moment of time, right? This is around the 15-minute mark, right? The entire early game, the Buffaloes are like, you're not getting it. That's not happening. 15-minute mark comes in, and you see that the Royals are doing what they do best. But the Buffaloes find a fantastic play near the 28-minute mark. They do multiple times, finding great plays, nullifying anything that the Royals could do, and just like 2 repeated mistakes and then a great play from the Royals at around the Elder Drake ends a lot of the work that they had pulled off, which is so unfortunate. This is such a solid game from them. Let's take a look at the next one. We got the LEC's G2 versus LCK's T1. And a couple of days ago, if you were to really ask, T1 winning would be an upset. But really at this point, the expectations were so thrown off. T1 winning was the expected thing from the start. And honestly, it's from them learning their mistakes. They relax and go back to their roots. Strong, fast-paced early game. Lots of action with no time for their opponent to breathe. I'm not quite convinced from this game that they are fully back on form because of the previous game they had against the Geniuses, but this is for sure a step in the right direction. G2, for their part, still show some solid play regarding vision and neutral objectives, but something must be going on if the coordination seems so disjointed and inconsistent in the last 4 games they've played. 4 losses in a row raises a lot of question with how they approach the game, because this looked more standard out of them, and it was a good opening from them. Like, the early game from G2, pretty good for the first 5 minutes or so, and they were probably targeting T1's draft conditions from it. But time and time again, G2 would overcommit on a play, or a kill answer would come through, and T1 would just not opting to play fully into their team fighting at all, controlling the tempo at all points of the game. And at the rate that things are going, G2 are likely to go from favorites after day 1 to getting eliminated, especially from the way that the Talons and Evil Geniuses are playing out this particular tournament. This is an actual scenario that could happen. It would be wild to go from such a win streak to get eliminated. Let's look at the goal graph here real quick. So, immediately off the board, you can tell that so often G2 find some lead early in, but nothing enough that, T1 are super capable of getting back. And these are just from the early mistakes that, G2 were properly targeting. But the second, just a bit of an inch, just a slight inch to it, and the whole thing comes crashing down, right? T1 are incredibly efficient, and this time, just as they're looking to do a Baron play, and everybody's like, no, T1, don't do it. No, they don't commit to a Baron play. They use a vision play to make G2 think that it's going to happen, and they end the game. And a proper T1 style, fast and furious. Let's take a look at the next game. We got the VCS's Saigon Buffaloes versus the PCS's Paris Saint-Germain Talons. I'm having some weird up and down emotions today, it seems. Honestly, this is such a good set of games for the Buffaloes to just show off when they're eliminated. They get to show how they pull off the second seed, because it's especially against the Marines in the VCS, the second seed is huge, right? They neutralize early game strength, use vision denial to get picks, and create team fights on a chaotic set of fights. They're usually splitting things up on weird flanks and weird disjointed plays. They still fumble when trying to close out the game, literally having the same mistake again that cost them the game against the Royals. That said, The Talons aren't as strong at punishing mistakes, and Buffaloes could recoup and reset. And the Talons are usually pretty good with vision denial, but it seems like the Buffaloes kept finding ward spots that were just unnoticed, creating some phenomenal flanks and ultimately winning them the game. The Talons, you look more and more on form, but there are still these moments of passivity that tend to cost you the game, which is not a great sign in my books. Let's take a look at the graph from this, right? It's going to look a little wonky. And just because whatever the early game comes off is really neutralized by the Buffaloes, and the Talons don't get much from it, but they're not really a strong early game team. It's mostly coming off of the front of like the mid game where the Buffaloes straight up navigate around any setup that the Talons have to bring. Again, the fumbling still happens every so often, right? The 21-minute mark, they get the Baron, and where you think they could be ending the game around the 24-minute mark, they have to like back off. They overcommit on a play. And so this, I would have loved to see this from the Buffaloes earlier. It would have given a nice indication of like scaling of like abilities that the Marines would have had and what the real VCS representatives would have gotten. But from the play itself, the Buffaloes also show their highest highs, which is an incredible set of pressure that is hard to keep up or nullify. And with it, kudos. This is a great set of times. And tomorrow, when you get the chance to play spoilers, I would love to see just the entire circuit get like totally rewritten. 10 out of 10. Let's take a look at the next game over here. And it's the last game of the day. The last game of the day could have been an upset, but, you know, there's only so many upsets you can have in a day. We've got the Royal Never Give Up from the LPL and Evil Geniuses from the LCS. And from my tone of voice, it could have been close. But the Royals have shown nothing but consistency across the board this tournament. Regardless if their early game is not as strong as like the other top two potential tournament favorites, they weather it usually or pull ahead, and once the mid game goes through, we know for a fact they'll navigate it usually fairly effortlessly. I got there. This game is no different, as so many of the fights taken near the end of the game reflect an understanding of how to increase tempo while avoiding positions that can be answered back. Specifically, and this just to be a little bit more specific, the Royals find flank angles consistently using their vision and control, knowing that when they're trying to attempt to dive, they're no longer doing so in a position that can be caught out, separated, or picked off before getting any kills in return. And the Geniuses, for their part, played some decent vision and had an understanding of where to attack the Royals so that they would, they could hold on to the game a little bit. But at the points that it happened, either the timing is a little off on things or they're too far behind for it to matter. This game secures a spot for first or tying for second place or for first place. So tiebreakers are either the minimum for RNG or literally their first place based off of the events that will happen tomorrow. But it's pretty likely, based off of so far what the results are and them being the most consistent team, that they're going to be the first seed out of the tournament tomorrow, getting the chance to choose who they face. Let's take a look at the goal graph real quick before we head to that specific thought. So, right, immediately off the cuff here, right, the keyword here is the 15-minute mark. And usually there's the 15-minute mark is the plus or minus situation. It's really the mid-game point, because the Geniuses really nullify a lot of the pressure that comes from the way that the Royals play. The only issue here is that, like, the Royals are still slowly and passively gaining the type of resources that they need to get to the point where they are. And as soon as the mid-game arrives, it's all but smooth sailing. And they're fairly efficient this game, right? The Geniuses is still not figuring out a way to handle mid-game pressure, because a lot of the other opponents really focus or over focus on the early game, which is something the Evil Geniuses are just equally just trying to weather out. Let's talk about the Buffaloes real quick. As they're eliminated, we do say goodbye, right? It's unfortunate, but that is the scenario that they're put in. They did not win enough games. They lost more than they could. Yeah. And the sentiment a lot of the VCS fans internationally is that for this tournament, they would have preferred the Gigabyte Marines to come in, or the GAM Esports specifically. But at the way that it is, you're usually flip-flopping between guaranteeing the Vietnamese gold medal at the Southeast Asian Games or an international tournament that does not have any weight or bearing in terms of the World Championship without a necessary guarantee that they're going to win the whole thing. I understand where the choices came through. That said, that does not mean that the representatives here didn't show up. They really did show a very strong understanding of their strengths, how their opponents usually apply their pressure, and great flank angles as well as like chaotic team fights all around. This is a team that, despite their wild inconsistencies, have been an entertaining ride all the way through. And where a lot of the higher seeded teams have like given the habit of of trying to pick something unpredictable, the Buffaloes decided to join in on that fun, really telling everybody that, hey, we have the same kind of flexibility and we will compete with everyone, showing that they are nowhere near the same caliber as the Pool 3 and Pool 4 teams, really demonstrating that the VCS deserves their pool, and they definitely do. And I was here convinced that based off of just the way that they were playing and the way that Evil Geniuses and the Talons were kind of like struggling, that they were going to be the ones that are going to be the fourth ones out of the tournament. Now, granted, they did not improve to the same rate that the other teams did. And I think that's unfortunate to to just the nature of how this team operates. Their inconsistency means that there's also not a lot of improvement that goes throughout the length of a tournament. They've had some chances to improve over the time in their region, but being the only team to compete against the Marines is not much when their competition tends to usually sweep them off their feet and like barely any chances of competition. So they're used to laying behind. They've not gotten a lot of chances to do any type of improvement, and in the tournament itself, they didn't really get there until today. So they're going to be kingmakers tomorrow. If they get the chance, they will be able to tell us, hey, our wins and our almost win against the Royals are not flukes. I doubt they're flukes. When they are in their highs, they're really good. But I want to see them do more. Get the next 2 wins tomorrow. 2 more wins tomorrow, and you get to show that, like, hey, we tie likely for 5th or 4th place, but losing on the head-to-head matchups of everything, which already would be huge for this team, who really need it, especially since the 2 teams they're going to be facing is T1 and G2. Beating either of them would be solid. I just hope at least that, like, if the Vietnamese region gets to play Worlds and they get 2 seeds, showing them and the Marines would have a great contrast between the strengths and weaknesses of both teams in an international setting, and the Buffaloes will have more tools to compete against them. It's win-win for everybody. So, let's talk about the other things. I say other things, like just my general thoughts on the day, right? Outside of like how the VCS itself has been represented, has been a repeated subject all over the place. A thing that's mostly concerning here is, so T1 seems to be slowly coming back. RNG are sticking to their consistencies. The Talons are warmed up, and Evil Geniuses are showing that there are no slouches to the situation. But G2 now are really having it. I'm looking at the results right now. Yet they're tied with Evil Geniuses, and they're one game off from the Talons. They're this close to losing out the entire thing. And to me, this is an indicator that there's really no actual favorites, even though on paper the Royals are the clear favorites of the situation, having the highest win rate. They're already gone through the semifinals. Even if they lose the next 2 games and T1 wins the next 2 games, their head-to-head matchup means that they'll have to do a tiebreaker. Like, this is one of those situations where, like, they come up first or second. There's the only 2 options that they have left. And this is solid shit. Like, the Royals have shown their consistency throughout the entire time. And it's, your mileage may vary, but a lot of people were expecting this to be an early game show. And RNG not being the early game team of the region, I would have expected them to struggle a little more during the tournament, but it really shows that a lot of these teams who have not had a lot of competition in the region or not really staked a consistency of some sort have been, what's the wording I'm trying to get here? Have not done enough to understand how to, like, go against a team that plays it so safe like they do. Because it's one thing when the Royals play in the LPL and they're usually falling behind is because they're playing incredibly safe. And they've seemed to have adapted that particular playstyle to lose the least amount possible or come out slightly ahead. And I'm so incredibly impressed by this kind of adaptation. Now, the defending champions, they were not, like, this was still the team that I expected to be the closest to competition to T1. And best of 1 scenarios are hard to analyze for how they'll translate to best of 5, because best of 5s are messy for many of these teams. Because a lot of these teams won off of either very close margins or weird streaks that other teams just kind of like fell over and died. But we're still a day away from this. If the trend goes as it is, G2 are likely to get eliminated either on a tiebreaker or no tiebreaker allowed. Nor tiebreaker even possible. They lose 2 games, and the Talons and Evil Geniuses move through, which would be baffling. And T1 seem comfortable in their situation where they're not likely to get eliminated either. But it's up in the air. Only 3 slots remain, 4 teams to go, and none of them have secured anything yet. I kind of want to hear what you guys think. Tomorrow, we got a lot of predictions going in. Do you change your mind on who's going to go through? Do you have any last-minute changes or swaps over? Have some of your predictions gone completely out the window? Or are you like hardcore fans and you knew that the Royals were really going to go through? Any and all thoughts that you have, I would love to hear below. Just to continue on also the tracking of the champions, it's still the same. It seems like this is going to be the meta for the end of the entire tournament, right? Still the same top 5 that are going through. Lucian is never going to see the light of day. But again, to reiterate, I'd love to hear everything that you guys have to think down below. Thank you again for watching. If you love this kind of content, like and subscribe for, all the doobly-doos and everything like that. I really enjoy making this content and seeing a lot of you watch this. I deeply appreciate it. Keep the good keep analyzing as much as you can. We'll see you tomorrow for the last day of the Rumble stage, where we'll find out who the next 3 teams to qualify for the semifinals are. See you tomorrow. Ciao.